Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and today we're going to go over 10 houseplants that will turn your home into a jungle. Obviously, I have a lot of houseplants in my home, but I really do feel like there are some in particular that really contribute to making my home feel like the jungle that it is. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of them today. So the first one I want to share with you guys is this plant that is very prevalent in my home, of course, for good reason, because it makes my home feel very lush, is the Scindapsus pictus. And this one in particular is a Scindapsus pictus argyrius, I believe, so one of the more standard ones that you'll find in a houseplant store. And I do want to point out that this is bone dry. I really need to go ahead and water this, but that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to share this one with you guys today. So this Scindapsus, which is commonly referred to as the satin pothos, when it's in need of water, the leaves kind of start to curl up a little bit. I'm sure you're going to notice that some of the foliage is really starting to curl, and that's its telltale sign to me that I need to go ahead and water this plant. So not only does this plant bring very lush vibes to my home, it's also very easygoing, easy to take care of, and easy to maintain, so I really enjoy that. And it does get these very long legs. As you can see, there's a bunch of vines growing around here, and these vines get very, very long. I have a different type of Scindapsus pictus in my home that's actually growing up and around, and I used to have vines that came down here, but I'm usually chopping them because they get in my way. Those vines are like 20 feet long at this point, and I've had that one for probably like 2 years, maybe a little bit longer than that, so it is really nice how fast the vines grow, especially once it gets acclimated. This is a plant that really grows very, very fast, one of the fastest growing plants in my home. It's not very needy when it comes to light. This is a plant that I feel a little bit more comfortable putting it in some of the darker areas in my home. Of course, if I have it closer to a window, it's going to grow faster, and if it's further away from window, it grows slower and requires water less often. But as I said, with the kind of the leaf curl that I really enjoy about this plant, I just put it up high on a shelf. Doesn't need to be the brightest shelf, and as soon as I see those leaves starting to curl, I know it's time to go ahead and water this plant. So a really, really easygoing one, great for beginners, and it's really going to bring such a jungly vibe to your home. Another one, of course, is this very lovely kangaroo paw fern. So this is a Microsorum, I believe. Diversifolium might be the species. If that's incorrect, I will put it on screen, obviously. But this is just such a lovely fern. And if you're watching this, maybe you're like me back in my earlier plant stages, and I was terrified of ferns. I would bring a couple ferns home with me, like in my first year of gardening, indoor gardening, and I never had good luck with them. I always thought I was doing my best with them, but they one day were always just dried up, basically pieces of garbage, so, or future compost, whatever you want to call it. This is not one of those ferns. This is a fern that I find is much more hardy. The leaves are much thicker and they have a much more like glossy sheen to them. It does a much better job at maintaining itself with drought, which is the main problem that I find with ferns, such as like a Boston fern or a button fern, which are, you know, some of the more common ferns that you're gonna find at a houseplant store. But I just think that this fern is so lush. It's so easygoing. It really does bring a vibe to your home. I have one in my bedroom that I think I've neglected a little bit in the past couple months, but it's still hanging on, which I can tell you, if this was a Boston fern and I was neglecting it, that thing would just be a bunch of dead leaves that have just kind of fallen off and accumulated in a pile on my floor. So this is not one of those ferns. I really, really appreciate that. And as it grows, it has these kind of like legs, I want to say, that kind of crawl around and they'll reach over the side of the pot and the fronds will come off there. Kind of similar to a rabbit's foot fern if you're familiar, but definitely less scary. If you're not a fan of those fuzzy feet, this is not one of those ferns. It just grows in a very similar manner, but it just has such a nice vibe. It's so easygoing. You could put it near a bright window and water it more often, or you could put it in a darker area and just, you know, water it like once a week. As long as you don't forget to water it, of course, it still is a fern. It's not indestructible. But if you have struggled with ferns and you really like the vibe, just like me, I would highly recommend trying out a kangaroo paw fern. You find them everywhere and they're incredibly inexpensive. This price tag right here says $9.95 for this large plant. So that's a very, very good deal, especially in today's climate. And another one very similar, not a true fern. I feel like I've been talking about this plant a lot recently, but for good reason. This is an asparagus fern. So this is Asparagus setaceus. Sometimes they call it Asparagus plumosa. Not sure which is the correct name. I'll put one of them on screen. This is called the asparagus fern because it's an asparagus plant that looks a lot like a fern. So it's not a true fern. So if you are terrified of ferns and you're still like, no, I'm not doing the kangaroo paw fern, maybe try the asparagus out, because I really find it to be a little bit hardier. This is one that does require light. This is unlike the kangaroo palfern where it can handle lower light settings. I do find that this one wants to be in a windowsill or very close to a windowsill for it to do its best. I have found in my own experience that if this plant is not getting that kind of condition, that it just, the leaves or the fronds or whatever you want to call these little things with all these needles on it, they just start to turn yellow and then they will just fall off. And similar to like the Boston fern, as I was saying, it will just accumulate in a pile of yellow needles all over your windowsill, and it's frustrating to clean up. So I would recommend, you know, putting this in a bright window and watering it regularly. This is one that I'm probably watering like every maybe like 5 days. I do try not to forget about it because I do really like the vibe. But like I said, it is a little bit hardier. This is one that has a very tuberous root system. Sorry for all the traffic going on outside. It has a very tuberous root system, so there is a lot going on underneath the soil inside the pot. And actually, those tuberous roots are known for like breaking and busting open terracotta pots even. So this is one that I'm like, I should probably remember to repot it like every 2 years just to be sure that I'm doing okay. But I really, really enjoy it. And it recovers very well. Even ferns recover very well, but what I love about asparagus is that if you're just not happy with the way it's looking, like for example, probably about like 6 months to a year ago, my plant was just, it was all up here, all the old stuff had died off, and I just wasn't really liking the look of it, and some of the fronds had just like some like yellow edging that I wasn't really a fan of, so I went ahead and cut it back. You can see all the old stumps from before at the base of the pot. And then in a short amount of time, all these little fronds started coming in, and now my asparagus fern is happier than ever. So I really, really enjoy it. I grow this one by a south-facing window. I have a couple asparagus ferns in my home of different varieties, and I seem to grow them all by a south-facing window. But honestly, I do think a west, east, and possibly even a north would do okay. You just got to get the watering, I would say, correct. So really excellent plant, highly recommend it. Okay. And I do actually want to talk about a plant. I have a couple plants I want to talk about today that are just too big. They're too jungly and lush for me to even pull into frame. So one in particular is my Philodendron red emerald. This philodendron grows like wildfire. It is quite fantastic. It is a green-leafed philodendron that has red petioles and stems that really, really pops out. It is a very common philodendron, at least in my area. I'd say a philodendron that looks very, very similar, that might be a little bit more common, at least all throughout the United States, would be Philodendron burl marx, grows in the same exact manner. But we're talking about Philodendron red emerald today. So this one has just like these incredible elongated, like spade-shaped green leaves, and they are very green and lush, and it really stands out with its red counterparts. But what I love most about this plant is how fast it grows. It is a plant that will climb up to your ceiling, I feel like, in a very short amount of time. I've had mine for probably about 2 years now, and it's taller than me. It's so fun watching these plants grow, and it gives me hope for some of my other philodendrons, but this plant really has just proven to be a philodendron that it's gonna cost a small amount of money. I believe I bought my 6-inch like moss pulled plant for probably like $30, maybe $40 maximum, which, you know, for philodendrons, a full pot of a 6-inch pot, especially these days, is a very good deal. But I think I was even selling them in the houseplant store for even less than that back when I worked there. So they are very readily available, an excellent houseplant, very easy to propagate too. You could propagate it just like a pothos. But if you're looking for a fun philodendron to really make a statement in your home, and you're not really into some of the larger philodendrons or thaumatophyllums, let's say, then I think this is a great option. It's really going to stand out, and it's one that you're going to need the space for it. So I know it starts small, but I really think you could start with just one small cutting that maybe you traded for. And in due time, you are going to have a plant that, just like mine, is as tall as you. And I do have another philodendron that I want to talk about today. It's a little similar in the sense that it's got the green and the red. I guess my example is probably not going to do it justice, but this is a Philodendron squamiferum. I'm obsessed with this leaf shape. I really think that this leaf shape really pops in the home. But not only that, this plant really gives you those like freaky jungle vibes with its petioles that it has. So it has these very fuzzy petioles. You might be able to see behind me here, I actually have another one that has the petioles that are much more red and kind of like freaky looking. Like I know some people are kind of like freaked out from these types of petioles, but I think they're really funky, and like I said, they really stand out in your home. Very similar to the Philodendron Red Emerald. This one will climb up a moss pole or a trellis, whatever you want to give it, something to climb up. It just doesn't seem to grow as vigorous as the Philodendron Red Emerald, but like I said, that plant is probably a little bit more common for good reason. But this is just like my funky selection of this video, where if you want something that's really gonna like pop out, I really do think that this one really stands out, specifically in this corner right here. Like these red petioles and these funky shaped leaves, absolutely love these lobed leaves. They just really stand out, and it's one that like everyone's eye is going to be caught towards if they're in my home. But as you can see, you can have it a little bit smaller, and the petioles do fade back over time. But once the new leaves come in, which if you're doing well with caring for your plant, it should put off new leaves. This is a plant that I propagated, so I think it's still kind of acclimating to its space before it starts to get growing, hopefully in the springtime. But it is such an excellent plant, really a showstopper. So like I said, I think this is more of my funky showstopper selection for today. Out of all the plants I'm talking about in today's video, I'd say this is probably the one that's the most difficult to get and possibly the most expensive. I don't really know, but it's just this leaf shape. It's just killer. It's really going to give you like that tropical vibe if you're looking for that. So I really love this plant. There are a couple other philodendrons that have this leaf shape as well, like Philodendron florida and Philodendron pedatum, but they lack those fuzzy red petioles, which are so incredible, and actually, I guess, kind of a fun conversation piece. Another aroid that I want to talk about today that is too big for me to get on camera is my Syngonium chiapense. So this is an easy enough to find plant. You might have to order this online, but I've been seeing nurseries carry this lately. It's very similar to that plant that's been popping up on the market recently. That's like the Syngonium macrophyllum, like frosted heart, I think they call it, or something like that. That one I think is a little, it's not my favorite plant. It just looks a little sickly. I'm a big fan of these large, waxy, robust, round leaves that the Syngonium chiapense has. It's one that since the day I brought it in my home, it made an impact, but now that I've been growing it up a moss pole, or you could grow it up a trellis or any kind of stake, it's really just like wowed me, and every time I look at it, I'm just like thrilled to watch this plant continue growing, and I feel tempted to take some cuttings of it to make it a nice fuller bushy plant, because this thing really just, for a plain green plant, this one really does make such an impact on my home, really does make it feel like such a jungle. It's also very easy to maintain. Syngoniums pretty much across the board are very easy plants to grow, but this one really takes the cake. It's right in the vicinity of a west-facing window, which it really seems to enjoy, and it doesn't even seem to wince if I forget to water it, which is great. Very similar to the Scindapsus pictus. It will just kind of curl in its edges ever so slightly when it's in need of water, which is kind of its way from telling me across the room, hey, I need water. I go ahead and give it a little bit of a drink, and by the next day it looks good as new, and it's the bright shining plant star that my home needs once again. I guess you could use the Syngonium macrophyllum. I just have a gut feeling that that's going to be like the more common plant by the end of this year. But I just don't think it has as much as that like oomph and pizzazz that the Syngonium chiapense has. It is a very robust plant in comparison, so highly recommend it. It's a really great plant. And let's talk about this one next. So this is a really nice common houseplant that I really think goes a very long way, and I do think it's kind of overlooked quite a bit. So this is a lipstick plant. Gonna make sure I don't drop this planter. This is a lipstick plant. This is actually a variegated version, so this is Aeschynanthus radicans variegata. However, the variegation, in my experience, really does not hold up. So do not pay any extra money for the variegation, but it's a lipstick plant. I don't think that it costs any more for the variegation, at least in my neck of the woods. They cost exactly the same. So just something to bear in mind there in case anybody's trying to nickel and dime you. But it's a really excellent plant. What I really love about it is the way that it grows over time. So I've had this one for, I don't know, maybe like a year and a half, maybe borderline 2 years now, and you can see how it looks. It looks very different if you're used to seeing like a 6-inch or 4-inch pot of lipstick plant in the store. They really do not have this type of energy to them. Some people might think it looks a little bit more like ratty than the ones that you get in your home, and you might be more into that like full plant vibe, but I think that this just like cascading vine mess is just like exactly what every home needs. And this plant flowers. We're in the middle of winter right now, so I do not have, well, I guess we're getting kind of close to spring, but there is no flowers on this plant. Maybe it'll flower for me soon, but I am perfectly fine with just having this wonderful wonderful vibe of these lovely, lovely vines. It's just so great. I feel like if they're long enough, you could like swing on them like Tarzan vines. You know what I mean? It's just so great. I really love this. It's got more of that relaxed vibe that I don't think Hoyas have. Hoyas are kind of aggressive with the way they're kind of like reaching out, looking to grab onto things. Aeschynanthus are not going to do that. They're going to grow up and out till they get too heavy and then just fall flat and be these extra, just nice, dangly, soft vines that are just there to like cascade down the side of a bookshelf or hang up in a macrame hanger or something like that. It is really such a vibe. So one that I really don't think should be overlooked, probably one of the most inexpensive plants that I'm talking about today. And you can see that it really will grow in a really excellent manner over time. I think a lot of people like pick up lipstick plants at the plant stores thinking it's a Hoya, and then they see it's not a Hoya and they're like, I don't want it. So don't do that. Let's talk about this one next. This is a kind of different plant than most of the other ones I'm talking about today, but it still really gives you that jungle vibe. So this is a Rhipsalis, which is, it is a type of cactus, but it's a jungle cactus, which is a lot more fun, in my opinion, than cacti, because this is not gonna poke you. It's just kind of fuzzy and fun. It does feel kind of weird, but it's not like a pokey cactus. It's just kind of like these like weird like rigid hairs that are just like kind of fun. It's like beard hair. It's really fun. So I really love the manner that this plant grows. It is just like a cascading mess of strings, and that's what really sets it out from the rest. It doesn't have any leaves. These stems are the leaves. I think it's so much fun, specifically when they start really growing and they just kind of become these jumbled messes. Of course, they could look kind of sparse if it's just like one little bit of plant hanging out of a pot, but if you got a mess like this, I think it's fantastic. And imagine just like a whole mess all of the way around and just like hanging this plant up in the corner. And then it just keeps on growing down to the floor, and it's just like, it feels like you can like hide in it, you know what I mean? So I think it's such a vibe. There are so many types of Rhipsalis. The reason I wanted to talk about this Rhipsalis pilocarpa today is probably because it's like the most inexpensive common Rhipsalis that you're going to find at your houseplant stores. When you get Rhipsalis in larger hanging baskets, like a 6-inch even or an 8-inch hanging basket, at least from the people that I would purchase from back when I was a buyer, those things cost a lot of money. However, I would have them in selections of like 4-inch pots from like my local cacti people or even like my terrarium plant growers, and they were always on par with like a golden pothos about. So pretty inexpensive, but perhaps they're growing out these more lush varieties in like these larger pots because it's, you know, more worth it to buy these plants not looking like one little string in a 4-inch pot. So I guess that is something to bear in mind there, but there are so many types of Rhipsalis. They're all going to give you that kind of like spaghetti plant vibe. It's really, really cool. They do actually flower. They're not the most showy flowers, but it is kind of nice when this plant starts to just have a couple flowers here and there. This Rhipsalis has white flowers. I'm not really familiar with some of the other flowers on Rhipsalis. I'm not sure if they come in a variety of colors, but like I said, it is quite nice. It's kind of sweet, actually. I really enjoy it. So really fun plant. Would be remiss if I didn't talk about this, even though it's not what you would normally think of when you think of a jungly, lush plant, but it really does have that vibe that I'm looking for. I think I do have one more that I can't pull into frame today, unfortunately, which is my Natal mahogany or my Trichilea emetica. This is such a great plant. This is one that is just like your classic tree. If you need a tree for your home, don't get a ficus, skip it, it's just gonna fall apart on you. There are a couple other great options, but an option that I think is really great for practically any home setting is a Natal mahogany. So I have mine in the dead center of my apartment. It's been there for probably about 2 years. Has it grown tremendously? No. Has it grown for me? Yes. Has it died? No. So that's something I really, really like about this. It is just like your classic like mess of tree and leaves. It kind of has that similar look to like a coffee tree, a coffee arabica, if you're familiar with that. But in my experience, it is much easier to maintain. The leaves do not brown nearly as quickly. I just think it's a much better suitable houseplant. The only thing about the Natal mahogany is that you kind of need to be mindful with the watering. It is a plant that I believe in its natural habitat grows in like the riverbed, so it is used to having wet feet. So I actually will just take this plant, put it in my shower every week. If I'm feeling lazy, maybe I do every 2 weeks, but it's in a 10-inch pot, so it's not like drying out as quickly as it would be if it was in a 4-inch pot. I put it in the shower. On cold water. I recently put it on hot water and I damaged a couple of the leaves, so oopsie, but we're recovering from that. But maybe you shouldn't use like cold, maybe you should use like lukewarm. But honestly, as long as it's not burning hot, it's probably going to be okay. I have south and west facing windows kind of around the perimeter of my home, but if I was to have like, I don't know, a north or east facing window, I would probably have it a little bit closer to the window, but it would still do really well. In fact, it probably could even live up to like 4 to 6 feet away from those settings, just because it is a plant that really seems to do very, very well in those situations. If you did have it in too bright of light, the leaves could possibly burn, and the soil will probably just dry out a little too quickly. So this is a plant I do find fares very well in the area that I'm giving it. If I gave it a little bit more light than sitting in the dead center of my home, do I think it would grow a little bit better? Yeah, but it's doing perfectly fine in the dead center of my home. It's been there for 2 years. It's growing. We're doing okay. Highly recommend it. I have been seeing them selling in like the little like 6-inch pots with braids recently. It's, you know, not as fun as the full bushes that you get in the 10 or 14-inch pots, but it's gonna save you money. The mahoganies don't seem to be the cheapest houseplant out there. I think they retailed at the houseplant store where I worked in 10-inch pots for around $100, so, you know, not cheap, but like I said, it's a really easygoing plant. If you purchase one and you remember to water it, I can guarantee you that you're gonna have that plant for a really, really long time, and it's going to do wonders to your space. It really does have such that jungle vibe that at least I'm looking for. And last but not least, I think I only have one more to talk about today. I'm gonna pull this one right here. I gotta talk about Aglaonema. So these are Chinese evergreens. This is just one variety, but I'm really including every single type of Aglaonema in this video. This one in particular, if you are curious, I believe is an Aglaonema spring snow. And the reason why I love Aglaonemas is because there is so much variety with them. There's white Aglaonemas, as you can see. There's pink ones. I have a red one behind me here that's probably barely gonna show on camera, but maybe you can see it. It's very wonderful if you watch any of like my houseplant tours or other videos. I'm sure I've featured some of these before. There's plain green ones that are probably the most inexpensive ones that you're gonna find at practically any hardware or big box store. But what I love most about it, more than the variety, is that they're very easy growing plants. This is probably the plant that I would recommend the most for a low light foliage plant. So I know I always recommend like ZZ plants and snake plants for the lower light areas of your home, but they don't really have leaves. I guess technically the ZZ plant has leaves, but they're like not very showy. But if you're looking for like fun foliage, Aglaonemas are what you want. So this is not one of the most common ones. I would say Chinese evergreen, or the Aglaonema commutatum Silver Bay, is probably the one that you would be most familiar with if you go into your houseplant store. There are other couple of varieties that do have very similar foliage to that. These ones that are a little bit more showy, like this white and like the red one I was showing you, if it did even show, I can't see the monitor. These are a little bit more suitable for brighter light conditions. When I say brighter light, I don't mean bright light, I just mean like brighter than darkness. So while I have like my green Chinese evergreens on top of my refrigerator and growing inside bookcases, this is not a kind of Aglaonema that I would trust in that setting. Maybe after a couple years of it acclimating to my home, I would trust it in that setting, but I wouldn't expect to bring it home from a nursery or greenhouse or whatever and just put it in a dark corner of my home and it do well. In the same way that I kind of expect that with my green ones. Of course, I do notice that because you are bringing it from a bright greenhouse to a dark corner in your home, they do have to acclimate, even the green ones, and you might notice some of the lower leaves from the base of the cane start to turn yellow and fall off. But if it's only happening like 1 or 2 at a time, it really probably is just acclimating. But if it's happening 3 or 4 or 5 at a time, something's probably going on. You're probably not getting the watering right, and I would probably recommend increasing the light, at least for the time being. But that aside, these are really such incredible houseplants. This striking foliage really just stands out. I love having them everywhere. I have 3 Aglaonemas in this corner right behind me here. They all stand out. They all look entirely different. And that's why I really love these plants. Not only are they super easy to care for, they don't require very much care or sunlight, they really do bring such a vibe to your home. And having a couple varieties with a couple different colors is really going to bring you that lush jungle vibe that at least I'm striving for. So I think that's gonna about do it for today's video. 10 houseplants to turn your home into a jungle. Of course, there are plenty more, but just walking around my home and just kind of taking it all in, these were the 10 that I was like, I have to talk about these. These are the ones that if people were just to have 10 houseplants in their home and they just got these 10 plants and maybe a couple variations of them, I think it would really do wonders to their space. Let me know in the comments which plants you think will turn your home to a jungle. Like I said, I'm sure there's a bunch more, but otherwise, thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at PhillyFoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.